Hi, my name is Yuval David. When Susanna approached me regarding her project Beshert, which you can learn more about at beshertbook.com, I knew it was a project I had to be involved with, as what we refer to as a third generation or a grandchild of Holocaust survivors with a truly heroic and well-known story in their own right. I knew that this was something that I would like to be involved with, as Susanna has a story that must be told and must be shared. The overwhelming story that she is sharing here is an incredibly moving tale. To call it a tale seems silly because it's a true story of heroes, of survivors, of people who went through some of the most atrocious things anybody could ever imagine. And these are stories that need to be taught, need to be used as educational tools, need to be used as a way to preserve history. So it's crucial that Beshert be preserved for future generations. We need to hold on to this, or what was a vibrant Jewish culture of Europe that was forever destroyed due to the events of World War II. The goal of Beshert is to preserve Eastern European Jewish history for future generations by publishing a book. This book, Beshert, that has been called a historical memoir and a gripping true life story. So for me, as an actor, as a writer, as a performer, and more importantly as a humanitarian and social activist, stories such as this one touch my heart as they touch my soul. And I'm here to read some excerpts for you from Beshert. Guilt. My first memories still haunt me to this day. I don't know how old I was, but I see myself with my brothers and sisters, hungry, cold, and alone, in our room waiting for Mother to return. It is not difficult, even now, to feel the gnawing hunger and the cold in my bones from that day. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed I shared with Mother and watched the door for hours, just waiting for her to come home. We didn't know where she had gone, but she had been gone all day. My fear was that she was never coming home grew stronger as darkness descended. We were forbidden to light the kerosene lamp when we were alone. I remember how Mother looked when the door opened. She was disheveled and out of breath as she thought she had been chased. She paused for a few seconds, walked over to me, and gave me a small piece of bread she clutched to her breast. I devoured it, turning away from my starving brothers and sisters. Intellectually, rationally, there is no reason to feel guilty. I know I was too young to be accountable, but in my heart, I ask myself over and over how I could have eaten this piece of bread and not shared even a bite with my brothers and sisters. White cotton burial shroud. Mother died on a Thursday in May. I was 14 years old. My brothers and sisters did not go to work the day before. We did not sleep that night. My brother went to get the doctor who gave Mother her one last injection. Adek sat at her bedside the whole night, while the rest of us sat in a corner of the room. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. The door to our room was wide open. The kerosene lamp threw threatening shadows on the walls behind my mother's bed. I held my breath as a strange black cat with blue eyes slinked into the room and ran under my mother's bed. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. It was just at that moment that my mother closed her eyes and stopped breathing. She died in Adek's arms. I was the only one who saw the black cat. It was not my imagination. My mind shut down as soon as I realized that Mother had just died, and I never told anyone what I saw. I was not sure anyone would believe me. However, even now, I can see that ominous sign as vividly as if it happened yesterday. I know in my heart that it was really the angel of death in another form who had come to take my mother. Once again, unbelievable grief overwhelmed us. According to the Jewish tradition, Mother's body was laid on the floor with the feet toward the door. Since it was Friday, we had until 12 noon to make funeral arrangements. Adek took care of everything. All I remember is that I cried, and that a woman came to our room to sew the white cotton burial shroud. During the 2 hours that it took her, she talked to us about how God gives and God takes. She said, God comes and you have to go to a place where you forever rest. She also said, children, don't cry. Soon a Messiah will come, riding on a white horse, and all the dead will come to life. Her attempts at reassuring us did not work at all. While we were, of course, in the midst of terrible personal tragedy, we had also grown more secular in the 4 years Mother had been ill. We certainly listened. What the woman had to say reflected the strong faith that most people still had back in those days. Brighter future. The Bund movement concentrated on Jewish youth, working diligently to gain their loyalty. They opened youth clubs where I soon became an interested participant. As I became familiar with the principles of socialism, I saw that Bund had the answers to the workers' dissatisfaction. Life took on a new meaning. There was hope for the future. The one magnificent dream became making Poland a great country for all workers. Most young people at that time had faith that a brighter future was ahead for working men and women. This hope was kept alive by anti-government literature. I too got involved and was willing to hand out packages to these pamphlets. One day I was standing calmly in a doorway of a building on Jelnay Street, after having put a package behind the door. My job was to wait there and distribute the literature to a few group leaders. A few moments, my friend Anka snuck her head in the entrance and whispered that an undercover police was observing the building and that I'd better run. It was just at this moment that a building watchman who lived in a little room next to the doorway stepped out into the hall. I realized he had been watching me too. I calmly walked out of the building as he went to pick up the package behind the door. I was young and fast, and even though it seemed he was about to come after me, I quickly found myself at the corner of Karmeliski Street, the most busy Jewish street in Warsaw, and I lost myself in the crowd. It was a miracle I didn't get caught that day. I was one step away from being hauled off to jail. We had run out of time. The same day of the second bombing, I was supposed to meet the boy I was dating. I was shaking after what had happened, but I went to meet Mietek at our usual place. He was already there, waiting for me, curious to see how our soldiers were being sent to the front. We walked to the train station, Dworzec Gdański. There were hundreds of people there. We heard only crying and shouting as women and children sent off their loved ones. One woman screamed hysterically as she threw her arms around her husband's neck. She wouldn't let go. It's difficult to find words to describe the horrible chaos we saw that afternoon. Every train was mobilized to bring our men to the front. The goods that were normally transported on these freight trains were now strewn onto the station platform. Every train was jammed with soldiers and even horses. Huge locomotives hissed and spewed steam. Greasy black oil dripped over the massive wheels. Mietek and I stood on a bridge above the railroad tracks in total silence. We could not bring ourselves to speak. We looked down on the pale and frightened faces of young men who knew they were going to meet with death. Mietek and I stood, arm in arm, watching this dreadful picture for quite some time. We turned to each other at the same time. He said that he'd known in his heart I loved him, and that now we had run out of time. Mietek was going to try to make it to Russia, a trip he had planned for a month. We knew we would not see each other again. We stood there, in tight embrace, tears streaming down our faces. He was right. It was too late. Mietek walked away, taking with him our dreams. No one really dared to dream anymore. We did not know what the next hour would bring, let alone the next day, month, or year. The Russian side. After what seemed like an eternity, our boat finally made it to the other side of the river, the Russian side. 4 men jumped out from behind the bushes, just as 5 of us got off the tiny fishing boat. They were the local border patrol. The fishermen and the boat disappeared into the darkness of the river as the patrol guards fired their guns into the air. "Stop! You are under arrest!" they yelled in Russian. "You have illegally crossed the river." They surrounded us and motioned for us to walk. It took the rest of the night to walk to the destination they had in mind. It was getting light when we arrived at a large barn, which was already packed with hundreds of people sitting on the ground. We found out that we were in the small town of Drohichin, which had fallen to the Soviet occupiers. Many Jewish families lived in this town. We were kept in the barn until the next afternoon without food or water. The Russian police stood guard and let us only out to relieve ourselves in the field, although we were not allowed to walk more than a few feet away. We waited, with no idea of what the Russians had planned for us. The next afternoon, Russian soldiers arrived on horseback. They threw open the barn doors and ordered everyone out. We were told that we had to go back to German-occupied Poland since we had crossed the border illegally. The only legal crossing of the Polish-Russian border was through a neutral zone, the one we had avoided. The soldiers, still on horseback, started chasing people. "Go back! Go back!" they shouted in Russian. I was desperate. I had read Mein Kampf and lived with the Nazi occupation in Warsaw. Even though it was for a short time, I had seen enough to know that I had to do something. I knew that for sure I was not going back to the German-occupied Poland. Without thinking, I started to move away from the crowd of people. I saw a soldier on a horse galloping toward me, and I threw myself to the ground. I heard the horse's hoofs circling around me. I was crying hysterically and closed my eyes tight. Thank you very much for listening to these stories today. I do hope that you will choose to continue following Beshert and the truly remarkable story that is being shared. Thank you very much.